Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be talking about that Rings of Power trailer and also what the general sentiment and reaction has been surrounding not just the trailer but also the show itself, as this article from Bounding Into Comics is talking about how a fan site, theonering.com, not to be confused with theonering.net, one does the power of good while the other does the power of evil. It is important, I think, for us to try and kind of flesh this out and provide as much nuance to this discussion as we possibly can, while at the same time being completely brutally honest and starting off by saying the trailer sucked. But before going any further into my thoughts on that, please make sure you smash that like button, line up that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification turned on. That way you know every time I do video or live stream goes live on the channel. So this is an article from Bounding Into Comics, and this is something that happened prior to the release of the trailer, where the Lord of the Rings fan site torched the new Lord of the Rings of Power. This is coming again from theonering.com, and the reason why theonering.com was showing such hatred, as it's been described, for the new series is because it has basically admitted itself, based on its description, based on the character posters, based on pretty much everything that's been released about this series, that it has no intention of actually respecting the source material of J.R.R. Tolkien. And I think that that is an incredibly important piece of information, because it's going to, I think, come back up again when we talk about some of the responses to the recent trailer release. But just to give a little bit of a taste of what this dealt with specifically, it says theonering.com expressed their concern for the show, noting the Vanity Fair article raised multiple red flags for the show in a thread on Twitter. They said, read the Vanity Fair article, and there's a lot, the Vanity Fair article, and there's a lot of red flags. My first thoughts are as follows. Notice, first off, too, shout out to them for actually linking to the article so that way people could actually read it for themselves and not just take their word or take their commentary on it. It goes on to say the first red flag is the inclusion of the hobbits in the forms of Harfoots in the series. OneRing.com tweeted, Amazon. But really, does it feel like Middle-earth if you don't have hobbits or something like hobbits in it? They then followed it up with a Tolkien quote, a format they would use to criticize the show throughout the thread. Tolkien, but there are, I fear, no hobbits in the Silmarillion. This is, I think, something that's incredibly important and something that is, I think, feeding a lot of the anger and frustration about this trailer, is that Amazon is saying we are basically doing whatever it is that we want to do. We are going to tell the story that we want to tell. We are trying to bring the story. We're trying to bring the stories and tales and legends and characters, loosely characters of Tolkien's era into the modern world. The problem is that when you're adapting material like this, especially material like this that people have a very strong passion for, keep in mind that there were hardcore fans of the book series, that when the original Lord of the Rings series came out, the original trilogy came out by Peter Jackson, there was a lot of speculation, there was a lot of concern, because it was like they were touching a sacred object, right? It was like they were touching something that people would rather have in their minds, in their heads, the vision of what certain characters looked like or what certain characters sounded like. And then when Peter Jackson gave his own spin on it and had to keep certain things in and cut certain things out because of the constraints of filmmaking and storytelling through film, that raised a lot of people's concern. But what I would say when it comes to the Lord of the Rings movies is that was able, I feel, to be able to convince a huge portion of those people that were concerned to actually really end up enjoying those films, right? Even though those criticisms, even those concerns stayed throughout the entire process of that trilogy as it unfolded, I think the vast majority of those people, I know River was one of them, but it is something where I think the vast majority of them who had those concerns ended up being at least entertained by what was being presented and understood that when you cross mediums, right? So when you go from a book to a movie or a book to a series or a series to a movie, etc., that there's going to have to be changes, that there's going to have to be things that are cut out, that there's going to have to be things that are left. But what Lord of the Rings, the films, did was they were able to keep the key elements. They were able to, I feel, express those key elements very, very well. And then when you look to especially the extended editions, right, the movies that the movies that Peter Jackson actually made before they were cut down by the studios to be more palatable for the general audience, you start to realize that he had a lot of respect for the source material. Now, did he follow every single word and every single line? No. And there are people that still criticize those films for that. But it at the very least did everything within its power to at the very least stay and follow the basic plot and the basic structure. Compare that with the Hobbit series, right? When the Hobbit came out, when the first trailers came out, there was again concern, but there was even more concern because not only did you have concern from people that were fans of the book, you were also having people who were concerned who are simply fans of the film or who entered into the world of Tolkien through the movies first. And I think that's another reason why fans of the book are a lot more likely to be more positive towards the films, because they recognize that the films brought a lot of new people into the world of Tolkien to be able to understand it, appreciate it, and to love it even more by diving into the actual books, by diving into extra works like the Silmarillion, or diving into the further works that were finished by his son, Christopher Tolkien, right? By those unfinished works. They were able to, I think, find that new life. I mean, look at the sales of those books during those times. And so I think hardcore fans recognize the good that came from those movies, despite the concerns that they had. You compare that to The Hobbit, where even the fans of the Lord of the Rings movies, or people who entered into being fans of Tolkien from the movies, had concerns, had issues because of the movement away from practical effects into full CGI usage, or into anything else that was very much, I know, and this is something that really ticks off River. This is something that really gets to her. And that was that it changed the story. That the Hobbit films we got was not really The Hobbit at all, because they added so much random crap, some of it based on the appendices, right? That was based on the works of Tolkien, but a lot of it was just random haphazard, and a lot of it became very clear that it was a pure cash grab trying to stretch the story out into 3 films, and it ended up being an abysmal failure when it comes to fan reaction and even critic reaction, especially in comparison to the Lord of the Rings series. Now we get to the actual trailer, right? We get to the actual trailer for The Rings of Power, and what we're seeing from the Rings of Power trailer is, one, nothing. We're not being told anything. And I think that the OneRing.com, again, this is the good One Ring website, I think that this site actually kind of hits the nail on the head, as they did especially with that Twitter thread I just talked about. It says here, my thoughts. Well, this trailer didn't let us sit on one shot for more than a second or two. I really wanted to feel more after this trailer, give us something to sink our teeth into, not highly produced special effects shots that tell us nothing about the story or characters. Do you remember the long, iconic shot of the Fellowship moving over the crest of a mountain in the teaser trailer for Peter Jackson's trilogy? That long shot at the end of that trailer really gave us something to chew on. And again, this is coming from a major fan site of the works of Tolkien, so more so of the book side of things than anything else. But even this one was able to recognize that, at least in the trailer for The Lord of the Rings, in the teaser trailer for Lord of the Rings, I know, River, it's crazy, it's insane. They were able to give us something to actually care about and actually say, ooh, this actually looks pretty awesome. Oh, wait, this is how they're going to portray Gandalf. This is how they're going to portray Gimli. This is how they're going to portray these characters. Okay, there's something that we can actually dive into and compare and contrast and all these other things. In the trailer for the Rings of Power, we don't get any of that. And I will disagree with this comment because they say highly produced special effects. The special effects in this trailer are complete trash. It's some of the worst looking special effects that I've seen in a very long time. There's this one sequence where there's this character, I believe it's an elfish character, who is on a mountain, and they're doing like a hopping from one part of it like, to another, like they're climbing a mountain or something. And they're doing this hop, and it looks completely CG'd fake. And that was another major flaw of the Hobbit trilogy live-action films, was that they moved away from the practical effects of The Lord of the Rings. They moved away from the sets. They moved away from using actual stunts. And instead, they used CGI to such a degree that people went into the films and said, man, this film just looks fake. And this is the reason why I'm looking back right now. I'm almost done Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, the extended edition, finally watching it on an actual legit 4K TV. And by the way, if you've not gotten the 4K set and you don't have an actual 4K TV, oh my goodness, the transfers are phenomenal. But you look at that, and it still holds up so well, and the 4K transfers look phenomenal. Whereas if you were to put on the Hobbit trilogy, even though that one is a newer trilogy, it's still already outdated. It was outdated at the time that it came out because of such a heavy use of CGI, and that is what this trailer is. It's a CGI fest trailer that gives you barely anything to actually chew on, that gives you barely anything to actually think about, and all that you're left with is the changes that they're clearly making, that this is not really fitting in the world of Tolkien. In fact, the way I would describe the trailer is that it's like they're trying to take the works of Tolkien from like an outside perspective. It's like they're looking at the works of Tolkien from outside of a window. However, they are also looking at that window from a telescope, and then they are looking through that telescope through another telescope, and that telescope happens to be 20 miles long. And that is what their perception of Tolkien's work is. And that is what we're getting. And on top of that, they happen to be in a young adult novel phase, and that is something that they are caring about more than anything else. This is what that trailer felt like. It felt like a young adult series, right? The YA series, right? It felt like they were trying to kind of capture the more modern day approach to what people tend to be drawn to, instead of actually focusing on the works of Tolkien himself. So this trailer already has so many people concerned. The posters already had so many people concerned. You had that one image of the female dwarf who is not a dwarf. I'm sorry, like, no matter what they say, that is not the description of a dwarf from either the books or the movies. And it got to the part in The Two Towers where literally it's like, people can't tell the difference between dwarf men and women. And then it goes back to Aragorn. He says, it's the beards, right? And we have a beardless woman who is clearly not a dwarf. It doesn't make any sense. And some people are trying, obviously, to say, like, well, people really have a problem with it because of her race, right? Speaking of that, well, seeing that the world itself of Tolkien is filled with multiple races from multiple different backgrounds, it seems that the issue is not of race, but of something else a little bit more. Just a thought on that. Now, what are we seeing from the actual trailer as far as the reaction is concerned? Well, since YouTube, of course, got rid of their dislike button, what we see right now is that with over 1 million views, it only has 9,000 likes. That's not a very good ratio. And then you look at it in the comment section, and then you're seeing some of the top comments are actually, I believe that this is in Elvish. They were able to get this translated into. And as you can see, these, when you add them all together, have about as much or very close to the same amount of likes as the actual trailer itself. So as you can see, over 600 likes for this one, over 800 likes for this one. There were a couple that I saw that had over 1,000 likes as well. And they're all saying the same thing in some respect or another. Evil cannot create anything new. They can only corrupt. Now, there's some question and some doubt as far as the origin of this quote, whether this came directly from J.R.R. Tolkien or whether this is an adaptation of a quote from one of the novels, right? Someone here on Reddit, for instance, said, "The shadow that bred them can only mock. It cannot make real new things of its own. I don't think it gave life to the orcs. It only ruined them and twisted them." Frodo from Return of the King. That is the actual quote, by the way, is what this one user there says. Now, again, whether or not there is an actual quote of J.R.R. Tolkien actually saying that evil cannot create, I think is, kind of missing the forest for the trees. Because the only criticism that I've seen has either been, one, this quote isn't actually from where you say it is. Two, you're just a bunch of Isterphobes. Or three, you're the same people that complained when Lord of the Rings came out. Remember that? And again, I think I kind of addressed that earlier on in the video, that yes, there were people that were worried and concerned. Because again, this is an IP. This is a property that people grew up with. This is an IP, and this is a property that people cared about. And one thing I think I can point to, I looked to this trailer and I asked the question, is this series, even just based on the trailer, going to create any new interest into the works of Tolkien? And I don't see it. We look back to the Lord of the Rings films, guess what? That increased probably 100,000-fold. Again, I know that probably isn't even a real, but 100,000-fold. Plus of interest in the works of Tolkien, right? The actual books themselves sold more. Silmarillion sold more, right? People actually cared and invested time to say, oh, I want to know more about these characters. I want to see what was left out. I want to see those extra details. When The Hobbit came out, people said, wait a minute, what in the world is this? And so it may have actually even had the same effect, but it was in the opposite direction because people said, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense. But people obviously, I would argue, weren't more fans of the series because the Hobbit films themselves were just not good. One of the biggest issues with the special edition set that they just released, right? The collector's edition set, which has no new extra material on it, and that most people would say, yeah, you know what? You could just cut off the Hobbit part because no one really wants that, is the fact that no one really cares about the Hobbit trilogy because it is so non-Tolkien in so many different ways. But it's also just not a good movie. Right? It's not a good series of films in comparison to Lord of the Rings, which, remember, Return of the King won an Oscar for Best Picture back when the Oscars actually meant something. This trailer, though, is a giant mess. And it's a mess for several different reasons. For one, it's a CGI fest, right? It is filled to the brim of CGI, right? It's also filled with commentary, right? A new legend begins. Yes, a legend that is hardly even loosely based on anything from the actual works of Tolkien. Again, plays off more as a YA novel more so than anything else. Here we have just some of the images from it. Also, they barely spend any time on any frame for any period of time for you to be able to even think about what is going on in that sequence of events. Here you have something that could have looked really cool. It's an elf capturing an arrow and then using it to shoot it back at somebody. But again, look at all of this use of CGI. This is the one I was talking about before. They were jumping from one to the other. This looks terrible. She doesn't even look real. And it raises all of these questions about what is the purpose of this show. Again, look at the CG. It's awful. It's terrible. You have this new character with, looks like they have horns on or something. Who knows what that is actually going to be? Who knows what that is actually going to turn into? There are a lot of questions. And some might say, well, that's the whole point of a trailer, right? Is to leave you with questions and no answers. Yes, but questions that you want the answers to, that you actually kind of care about the answers to. That's not what this is doing. This doesn't leave us wanting answers to questions that we actually care about. This is making us think, what in the hell are they doing? Who knows what they're spending their money on here? Because it's not the special effects. It doesn't seem that, based on what they have said about the story, right? Saying they're selling something new, right? They're telling something that's never been seen before. You know, they're going in directions that have never been seen. But they're not going to respect the source material. So again, who is this being made for? Because it's not being made for the fans. And again, I think the OneRing.com is a site that anyone who's a fan of the series should go to, as the OneRing.net has really succumbed to it. Again, going back to this quote, again, regardless of what form you read it in, evil cannot create anything new. It can only corrupt and ruin what good forces have done. I think the OneRing.com is absolutely the good, whereas OneRing.net has been so corrupted. It's almost like they've been corrupted by the One Ring of power, as it were. But then also, I would recommend reading this article from Bounding into Comics, because it goes into this entire structure here. But again, this is just one of the issues, right? The fact that they're adding in characters that did not exist during the time in which they existed. It says, Amazon, this is material that is sometimes scary, but it's also heartwarming and life-affirming and optimistic. It's about friendship. It's about brotherhood and underdogs overcoming great darkness. Follow-up, Silmarillion, there is a little fun or earthiness, but mostly grief and disaster. Now, one could say, well, this is not a full adaptation of the Silmarillion. You can make that argument. However, the time in which they are taking place, the time in which the series is taking place, is also the time in which is covered in the Silmarillion. So even that argument doesn't make a lot of sense. But overall, the trailer is just not very good. As a trailer itself, it doesn't leave you really desiring anything more. It leaves you with, oh, wait, this is all you had? And the questions that it leaves you with, you're like, okay, I have questions, but I don't care about what the answer is. And also, honestly, it seems to me, based on all of what we're seeing from what Amazon has said, from the Variety article, right, from the hit pieces that have been done on fans for simply having basic criticisms and basic questions, is this. I think that this is going to have the same effect, and I think that this is going to be treated in the same exact way as A Wrinkle in Time was. A Wrinkle in Time, based off the work of a Christian author. The movie gets adapted by Ava DuVernay, who is a film hack. She is a hack of a filmmaker. What did she do? She made her story all about skin color, all about race, and stripped away the Christian elements of the story. Key to the story, by the way, since the author herself was Christian. You look at Lord of the Rings. I see the same thing going on here. They're going to take the works of Tolkien, which are heavily based on his Catholic belief. Keep in mind, this is pre-Vatican II Catholic. So if people are wondering, why are your lights purple now? Actually, yesterday we celebrated Septuagesima, 70 days before Easter. This is exactly the feast that J.R.R. Tolkien would have been celebrating. The same exact feast he would have been celebrating as a pre-Vatican II Catholic. And that was what it was inspired him. That's what inspired his works, was his Catholic faith. his life experiences, as does all things, right? All of our experience and influence us. But what I fear most about this series is that it's going to strip away any sense, any idea of the concept of good and evil, of the concepts brought about in this by someone who is coming at it from a Catholic perspective, is going to strip those elements away, just like they were stripped away in A Wrinkle in Time, and all we're going to be left with is a soulless husk. And obviously, they're putting a lot of money into it. They have a lot of faith in it. And all I can say is, what have you done? Seriously. It's almost as if we're seeing the events of The Lord of the Rings play out in real time. It's like Isildur was given the ring to destroy it, right, to do something good, and instead gets corrupted. And that's what we see going on here. Those are my thoughts. I know I talked a lot, covered a lot of different grounds there, more than just the trailer itself, but I thought that this deserved a more full discussion because there have been a lot of excuses. There have been a lot of, well, you said this about that. And I think it's important for us just to recognize what is actually being said by the biggest critics. And again, notice, the main thing being talked about here is that there's nothing in the trailer for us to really crunch on. What is the biggest message being said here? Hey, fans are not liking what they are seeing. They're not impressed by what they are seeing. This would be ratioed. That's not good for a Lord of the Rings series to do so. What are the biggest criticisms? Oh, you're not getting a quote right. You're an hysterophobe. And every single thing that Amazon has said has been refuted by the man himself, by the actual author himself, post-mortem, in this amazing OneRing.com Twitter thread. But anyway, I highly recommend that y'all look into it. As it says here, it felt only unnatural to us that an adaptation of Tolkien's work would reflect what the world actually looks like. It says here, I was from the early days grieved by the poverty of my own beloved country. It had no stories of its own, bound up with its tongue and soil, not of the quality that I sought and I found as an ingredient in legends of other lands. There was Greek, Celtic, Romance, Germanic, Scandinavian, and Finnish, but nothing English, save impoverished chapbook stuff. Talking about the inspirations. Anyway, what are y'all's thoughts about the trailer? Did you like the trailer, or do you feel the same as I do? Again, I honestly don't see how this could possibly be good. And some are going to argue saying, well, we got to wait at least for the series to come out first. Okay, I understand that argument. But when you have Amazon saying very specific things, when you have character posters saying very specific things, and when you have even defenders saying very specific things, I think we can have a pretty good judgment of what we're going to get. I'm going to be watching it with an open mind. I'm going to be going into it as a non-expert, right? I grew up with my dad reading me the story of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, but mostly The Hobbit. Because as we got older, we started to find more interest. But The Hobbit, my dad read to us several times. That's where I come into it. So it comes personal to me because of that familial connection here. I love the films, the Lord of the Rings films. Those I do have a passion for. So that's where I'm coming from. Where are you coming from? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, slap that fire button if you're watching on Odyssey. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my Patreon, Subscribe Star, and Locals members, starting off with Patreon animation commentator Brandon. Let's go, Brandon. Brian P., Christopher Bowman, Father Christopher Miller, hail to you, Father. Father Damian Cook, Fuzz Aldrin, Garrett Searles, Hannibal Grimm, Harold Francis, Hymir Ari Hymason, Inflamed Wood, Jacob Juice, Jeffrey Toon, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Gomer Kyles 79, Laura, The Modern Major General's Story, Mike Jackson, Mad Mitch Dunaway, Mondo Spieler, Mr. Peabody, On to June, Orange Hat Reviews, Out of Step with Reality, Priscilla Hall, Rosetta Owen, Stan Andrian, Teresa Martin, or Miss Martin Muses, Theodore Benden, Tina Bojan, and Tina B, the Empress of the Universe, thank you very much for supporting me over on Patreon. Also to my Subscribe Star peeps, UAB Mad Dog, which is Mr. Mike Jackson, Storm Tracker, The R, Fast Reaction, Nosferatu Gatsu, Stand For, John B, Mr. Roy, Glinzer, J. Alex McCarthy Jr., Dean Heiss / the new number 2, J-Rod the Beer Guru, and ZK-Man. Thank you all very much for supporting me over on the Subscribe Star platform. And to my 3 local supporters, we got Kara Tharp, UAB Mad Dog, which is once again Mike Jackson, super supporter over there, and Robert Barnes. Thank you very much for supporting me over on the Locals platform. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, please think about signing up on either of those platforms. You can find a link in the description below that will lead you to all of those different pages. It is known as the Willow link, as it is w.lo link, and it will have all of the links to that, to the Discord channel, to all different kinds of places, including places to support me as well. At the Citizen of Asgardian level, you get Citizen of Asgardian level is how it's labeled on Patreon. Still need to fix that, but Citizen of Asgard level, you get a shout out at the end of every live stream and video. If you join at the Army of Asgard level, you also access to a giveaways channel, which is featured on the Discord that I have. I know, River, it is very exciting. It is so exciting, where you get giveaways for things like 4K titles, Steelbook titles, etc. Again, I got some 4K Steelbooks of The Punisher, for instance. I've got 4Ks of tons of other movies, so I'm giving those away all the time. So if that sounds interesting to you, join the Army of Asgard level. Also, at the Keep of the Bifrost level, you get all of that stuff, plus you get access to a once a month and maybe twice a month. We're trying to add an extra podcast in there of me and John the Flick Pick Flickinger, where we talk about movies, and also you get to ask your questions. Any questions that you want to ask, you get to ask with that podcast. And then you have the Chosen of Valhalla level, which gives you access to all of those, and also a once a month podcast where you get to be featured with me on the main channel. We all get to talk together about movies, culture, pop culture, anything really that the Chosen want to talk about, or anything the Chosen want to promote is on the table. So if you like that, join at the Chosen of Valhalla level. Also, during your first month of support, you get a free t-shirt. Any t-shirt that you want from the main store, you get access to, and I do ship internationally anywhere in the world. Anyway, you guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.